Hello and welcome to the ChinnyVision podcast, a very irregular visit into the world of retro with me, Chinny Hill. And today I've got a guy who collects stuff from all around the world and has a very large retro collection. It's Johnny Blanchard from Retro Re-Enthused.
All right, Chinny, how you doing, mate?
I'm good. So we'll come to talk about your collection and bits in a minute, but when was the first time you saw and used a computer?
So the first computer I technically owned was an Atari 800 XL, but that was DOA. We got it from Rumbelows. My nan got it from Rumbelows, and it was dead on arrival. And so then my cousins obtained for me a Sinclair Spectrum, which was apparently second-hand. It's hard to tell. My cousins were slightly roguish, and I'm hoping it was completely legitimate. But yeah, so really, in terms of our generation, quite late, really, compared to everyone else.
Didn't Dixons want to change it up, give you a new Atari, or were you just stuck with it?
No, they kind of, there was a whole lot of dickering about whether or not it could possibly be broken, because these are high-tech bits of machinery which can never go wrong. And there was a lot of back and forth. My nan was a formidable character, and so she got her money back and refused to deal with Rumbelows ever again, which was a problem because we had a TV from them with a 50p slot on the back.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
So with that Spectrum, what were you doing?
To begin with, it was just gaming. It was we found a guy who, let's just say, had cheap games, and used to kind of come round with a briefcase to me and my friends, because it was a Spectrum area, poor area, lots of Spectrums, not many other machines apart from the one kid whose parents were middle class, and so had I think he had a +4 and a BBC Electron at some point. So this guy used to come around with a briefcase, and we just used to buy tapes with very interesting labels on them of all the latest games for pocket money, proper pocket money. It was kind of at that point when I discovered the BASIC prompt, and I started to just make my own silly little games in BASIC, and that's really kind of where my whole engineering career started, was just messing around, looking at these games that I was playing and saying, well, can I just make that in BASIC? The answer, of course, is no, not properly, but enough that you kind of got a handle for it.
So let me get this straight. There is a guy going door to door with a briefcase full of not exactly legitimate games.
I'm sure they were, I'm sure you had backups of everything, Chinny.
So what was this? I mean, I've heard, we talk about the playground and stuff and swapping, but I've never heard of this particular kind of thing happening. Someone actually going door to door. You see, I've seen people at markets, and we've all heard about Barrowlands and stuff up in Glasgow, but actually someone going door to door with games.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting business idea, I guess. And, for the cost of a few packs of cassette tapes, and I don't think you could rent Spectrum games back then because they weren't really in that kind of price arena. So presumably he did buy the games and then copy them and sell them on.
Because you've got to cover all the formats. So was it Spectrum? Was there C64 stuff in there? BBC Micro?
I never saw any of that stuff, but it may be that he tailored his business to the area he was going into. I never saw Spectrum stuff, but he may well have done Commodore and Amstrad as well.
And how often did he come round?
It was kind of like, so I want to say once a week, but I know it wasn't. It wasn't once a week. It must have been like twice a month or once a month. It wasn't especially often, and it was around the right time when I guess he'd worked out the kids had pocket money. Because it would be in that area of time when you would have pocket money to be able to buy this stuff.
Wow, this is a whole new world to me. You hear of people swapping games and videotapes at pubs and stuff, selling at markets. But actually, so it's like the Corona Man coming to your door with not fizzy pop but pirated games.
Yeah, the C90 Man is popping up.
What did you remember any of the games you bought off him?
A lot. I mean, yeah, I got a lot of games off of him. So my first experience of the Night Law games, the nighttime and all that stuff, that was definitely from there. I did hasten to, obviously we know of someone in that area. I did buy them properly at one point in my life, so it's fine. But I just imagine a Spectrum game, and the chances are I probably got it at least once off of this guy, because the games were at that time about $1.99 if you went to our local newsagent, stocked them on one of those rotating shelving displays, and they were about everything was basically $1.99 regardless of what it was. They didn't sell any of the big games. You had to go to W.H. Smith's in town to get all the kind of higher price games, which were way out of my league. And $1.99 was just too much for us to be able to afford. We'd have to save up for a couple of months for that. The last I remember getting as pocket money was £1.50. And so it was like kind of a month and a bit to get one game if you went to the local newsagents, and, you know, months if you wanted to get one of the proper boxed games from W.H. Smith's. So this guy was coming around and he was selling them, I think, for £1 for some of them. That may have been two tape games, I think. But anyway, it was £1 or 50p, one of the two. But you could afford games from this guy, so that was how you got the games.
As I said, it's a remarkable business model. So you've got the Specky there, and any kind of upgrades beyond that, where was your next jump to?
So I ended up, the next thing after that was I went to a Spectrum Plus 3, because that was, my mum had just got a job in a factory and was doing really well for kind of the first time really ever. And we had some money coming in, and she bought me a brand new from Dixon's Spectrum Plus 3. And it came with a multi-game disc. I think Yar Kung Fu was on it, but I can't remember any of the others. And it was kind of a weird revelation, and it was fascinating to play with discs. I'd used discs before. I'd seen PCs and stuff at this point. And obviously we had BBC Micros in school. So I'd seen them before, but the 3-inch discs are kind of a revelation. They look like they're kind of space age compared to floppy disks, the 5 1/4, because they just feel like a different technology in a way. And putting them in and listening to them whir up and stuff was fascinating for the time. And so that was a big one. But that was also the first machine I ever made a commercial program on. I made for a local garage who also had a Spectrum Plus 3. And I think it was my auntie had been talking to this guy. This garage he needed something for stocks and stuff, and he's got this Spectrum Plus 3 that he uses, and he heard I knew about programming, and I wrote him this simple stock maintenance database thing in Spectrum Basic, in Spectrum Plus 3 Basic, and they used that apparently for a couple of years, and I got paid the princely sum of £50, which was a huge amount of money.
Yeah, that is a huge amount of money for 87, 88, when that would have been if you were getting that kind of package with the game. Am I right there? Kind of that kind of time period?
It must have been about that time. Yeah, that sounds about right, because I would have been about 30. Yeah, about 13, 14. So yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Did you buy any Spectrum games on disc? Have problems getting hold of those?
No, because at that point I was earning a little bit more money in pocket money, and we could actually afford these things. And my £50 investment in my hobby was great.
As an Amstrad disc owner, getting hold of disc games, you'd rarely see them in our town in W.H. Smith. I put Robocop in there because it was the only disc game available. I'd usually have to go across to another town to buy disc games. So Spectrum Plus 3 games, were they as hard to get hold of in the shops as opposed to just going to mail order and getting whatever you wanted?
No, I don't remember them actually being that bad. I did use mail order quite a bit. Special Reserve I used. No, not for Plus 3 discs actually. I used Special Reserve for tapes in the end. But I definitely used mail order service for something, because I led on to spoiler alert for my next jump for Amiga a lot. But no, I think W.H. Smith had an okay selection, if I recall correctly, because I definitely bought multiple games from there for the Plus 3. So it must have had a fairly good collection. We had our W.H. Smith had the whole of the top level devoted to computers.
Well, that's a big one.
It's a relatively big one, yeah. So it had a lot of format, although the format started to dwindle, and you saw the poor guys with some of the more niche machines having to search for these tiny aisles which had like one shelf of games. The Plus 4, like my mate had Plus 4, and you'd go in and we'd have the Spectrum aisle, which was huge, and right by the counter so that they could put games on so you could try them. And then the Plus 4 one was kind of right at the back, just before where the photo booth was, with one shelf that he could look through for the few games that were coming out for that.
As an Amstrad owner in 1992, I can somewhat sympathise with that. And so which Amiga did you go for and when?
Yeah, so the Amiga 500, way after when it came out, I can't remember the exact dates, but my uncle, another uncle this was, had the Amiga 500, and he introduced me to it, and I got really addicted to this one shoot 'em up, which was like I can't remember the name of it. I've asked a million times, and people have told me a million times, but it's a shoot 'em up where you play like a bug, and you have to shoot other bugs, and I got really addicted to that game. And he basically sold it to my mum, unknown to me, for like a real cut down price. And so she presented it to me as a complete surprise out of the blue. It wasn't birthday, it wasn't Christmas, a real surprise. The Amiga, for me, was the first time when I would just go into a shop and be given pirated games. We had a shop called Just Tapes where I'm sure the shop itself was completely legitimate, but they used to do a lot of the demo scene stuff, and so they'd have lots of demos playing and stuff, but they'd also a thriving community of people swapping discs. And so that was kind of where the genuine piracy, because you didn't see Spectrum piracy as piracy. If you could stick it into a tape deck and just hit record, it doesn't feel like piracy. Whereas the Amiga piracy, it was all cracked games and weird protection things and compressed so that 2 disc games would be on 1 disc now. And that was like a real black art that was a whole new era of piracy. And yeah, that was, I guess, more blatant. That was the more blatant piracy, was the Amiga.
You can't get more blatant than selling pirated games or giving them away in an actual shop that should be selling. This seems like kind of madness in that you can have the legal game for 25 quid and the shop makes that money, but there is also these pirated games that aren't making that same money, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's a weird thing. Plus, the shop was called Just Tapes. I never recall it ever selling tapes. Maybe they did at some point and I just hadn't noticed it, but it was definitely just discs. They had mostly Amiga, but they had Atari ST as well. One of the best memories of that shop, they had a CRT screen. It was on a shelf with some very big speakers next to it, and they used to play some of the demos. And they once put on this demo that had come from, I can't remember what the demo was, but it started to play, and this woman with her obviously coming with a child to buy legitimate games. And then suddenly this demo started playing very graphic noises, just very loud around the shop. And the guy basically ripped the leads out of the Amiga because it started playing. It was just hilarious.
Oh dear. I mean, yeah, it seems like a shop that was it a long-lived shop, or did they manage to put themselves out of business?
I don't think it was particularly long-lived. I'm thinking around 3 years.
3 years isn't bad for a software shop. We had 2 in our town that both lasted a year. Presumably, there's the usual migration over to PCs and the Amiga. Or was there a 1200 and 4000? Or
no? The Amiga 500 was kind of my last foray in, if you will, the rebel machines. I moved on to a 286. I think it was the first PC I got. I needed it because I was doing programming now and I was learning programming, and this was now my trajectory. We found this advert in the back of I think it was Computer Mart or something, one of those. This place just outside Basingstoke, which sold second-hand computers, and we kind of went there, and they just had like racks of these computers and bits, which they're obviously just putting together to make machines that they'd sell. And the guy just said, "Look, you want entry level? Then do this, this, and this." And they just gave me this setup, which was just a kind of a cheap monitor, and I don't think it was Packard Bell. I definitely had a Packard Bell at some side, but anyway, it was just one of the small clone manufacturers and stuff. But that was fine. That was my first PC, and I played some games in it, but I did a lot of development on that as well. Starting with QBasic, and then I went on to C on that. That was kind of my first out of college development was on that machine. So that was the one where I kind of truly started doing my own stuff and putting out little public domain things like BIOS password systems and things like that. I moved to Mac at one point because at that point there was a lot of money in Macs, and then suddenly there wasn't a lot of money in Macs, so I had to go back to PC. But yeah, that kind of set up the rest of my formative computer years, certainly.
And on your kind of YouTube channel, you do a lot of tinkering with hardware. Is the PC where it began, or was you tinkering with stuff before then?
No, it probably was the PC. The PC, because I was generally buying not brand new systems. And so they wouldn't be particularly heavily spec'd, and they'd have problems. Because the PC was always easier. The parts were there. It was all off-the-shelf stuff mostly, and you could just get the parts quite easily. We had a Maplins in our area and also a Tandy at that point. So you could just kind of pop in and you could buy components and you could get advice from the people in there, especially Maplins. Maplins were really good for that. They used to have people that were genuinely nerdy about computers as well. And so you'd go in, you'd say, oh, yeah, I mean, it's got this fault with when it does a certain thing, and they'd go, oh, you know what, you should try this. If it doesn't work, bring it back and we'll try something else. And that was kind of the environment. That's why I think that's probably why Maplins was as successful as it was in that time, was because they had that proper we're all nerds together kind of thing. And so yeah, just repairing it and upgrading the PCs is probably where my tinkering first started. If you couldn't afford something, sometimes you could kind of rig it so you got a similar experience. So if you had a graphics card that wasn't quite fast enough, you could play around with it a bit and you could just make it do a couple of extra things by changing some resistors, because most of these were all the same SKU. They were just removed bits to make it do less. So and the graphics card would do like this resolution, or it would do this feature. But this other one, which was cheaper, wouldn't. But it was just because they'd removed some bits, and so you could just find those bits and put those bits back on. And that was a lot of the fun. And things like you get all the electronics magazines, which would tell you how to do all this stuff, which they would just get these bits from the manufacturers, and they'd say, oh yeah, but did you know if you did this, then it will do this. All those resources that were available, which kind of aren't available now. You've got the internet, but the internet always isn't great for that. Sometimes just one-to-one talking with people is still the best way of finding information.
Yeah, that local expert for computers or anything really, where you could go and have a chat with them and they give you some discs full of stuff and so on. So, were you hanging on to your old computers as time goes on, or were you selling that Spectrum and Amiga?
No, I think this is where I feel like I missed out compared to a lot of collectors, is because we were poor, we couldn't do that. If I wanted a new machine, I had to sell what I already had. My first PC I got because I sold not just my Amiga, but I sold my He-Man collection, which arguably I was too old for anyway. But it was kind of, we had that, you had to trade up, you had to trade in. There was no extra money to buy these bits separately. So yeah, no, it was always, I haven't got any of my original stuff because I had to sell it to get the next thing.
And you really stuffed then, in terms of games, going to a 286 PC from an Amiga, because even when I went to a 486, it was like, well, yeah, some of these 3D games are good, but actually I want Pinball Dreams on the Amiga because it's better. I want Sensi on the Amiga because it's better. So I didn't have to have that concern. I still had the PC and I still had good games. So you're kind of upgrading and yet having this massive downgrade in terms of gaming.
Yeah, I had no games for my PC for a long time. I was tinkering with it, just doing some development with what was built into it. I did have for a brief period a Trivial Pursuit disc because the guys had left it in there, but my family was very honest, and so we sent it back to them. But I did get to play that to begin with. But yeah, no, I had no games to begin with until I could afford to get some. And yeah, most of my PC games were legitimate because Just Tapes was gone. The online sharing places were, you had to have kind of an internet connection or some kind of online BBS connection to get that stuff. I had connections of people on the Amiga who did that, like the Just Tapes people and the people that always used to frequent that thing. They would have BBS connections and they could download discs and stuff when they were released. But I didn't have that on my own. And so I didn't really have that for the PC. So honesty by availability, I guess is what you call it.
Retro Re-Enthused and all your kind of coming back into retro, when did that start?
Oh, over 20 years ago now. So the start of that was kind of interesting, and isn't actually computer related. In fact, I steadfastly stayed away from retro computing because I knew retro computing would be a bad trigger point. And I thought the consoles wouldn't be, because whilst I had consoles, they weren't as interesting to me as computers. So I figured, all right, I'll do consoles then, because I'll get a few that I'm interested in. And it was sparked off by discovering the TurboGrafx, or the PC Engine, which I didn't know existed. It was weird, in my little bubble of British home computers and things, the consoles, it was the standard thing. In our playground, we had people with Nintendo, we had people with Sega. And so as far as I was concerned, that was all that existed, apart from the weird grandstand things, of course, but you know. And so I didn't know there were any other options. Whereas, of course, there are lots of other options. And the PC Engine was the one that kind of really sparked it for me, was the one that I thought, That looks really interesting. I didn't know it existed. I really must get one. I fermented a link with a Japanese guy, and we talked a lot, and he said, look, these pop up on our auctions all the time. And as it happens, I did in fact manage to get quite a cheap TurboGrafx myself from eBay. But then he kind of said to me, well, I can get you these machines relatively cheap. And he did. He put up some on top, I'm sure, but it was still vastly cheaper than they are now with the bubble. My collection is huge, but the reason my collection is huge is because most of it comes from before the bubble. My first AES, SNK Neo Geo AES, that cost me like 40 quid. Because it wasn't working properly, but the fix was easy, but they were just being sold cheap. Then suddenly this guy said, well, look, I can still help you, but there's this new service which does all the stuff I'm doing for you, and you can just search it yourself then. And that was Buy E. And I started looking at that, and that was the snowball. Just all these machines that I've never heard of. So when I do things on like these Japanese auctions, I never go into the video game section. I go into the video game other section, because I'm looking for things that are just I haven't heard of. I'm nostalgic for things that I've never been able to use, rather than things that I missed from back in the day. There's slight differences to that. The Sinclair Spectrum, obviously, because it's the thing that started me off. The Commodore 64 and Amstrad CPC range, because I never got the chance to really use those. And when you're in this kind of bubble of people that own one machine, that's the best machine. There's no other, there's no question, because nobody there to argue it. And then I discovered the Commodore 64 is actually pretty good and has some really, really good games, and most of them better than the Spectrum's games. And then the Amstrad CPC, which was massively underrated. It had the same kind of games as the Spectrum, but most of them were at least more colourful and had better sound. And a lot of the ones that were literally produced just for the Amstrad also performed better as well when they were just made for the Amstrad rather than ported across. And so that's where my collection is built up. It's built up of things that I had never had the opportunity to use when I was young, because they didn't exist. Either they weren't affordable to me, or they just weren't in this country, which is most of the Japanese stuff I buy, of course, is never in this country. And yeah, it's a weird way of approaching it, I guess. It's a lot of collectors, I'm sure, must do the same because of their huge collections, but it's a weird thing for retro to be nostalgic for something you never had the opportunity to use.
Speaking for myself, there's a number of machines that friends owned that I now have, because you want to, although as much as you'd stand up for your own machine in the playground and everyone else is rubbish, actually you wanted all those machines. And there's other machines where, you read about them in the magazines and went, oh, I'd like, that'd be nice to use. MSX games, I see those on sale. What's that like? A VIC-20, what is that? And things like that. But you kind of go into that whole things you never knew existed. You did a video on the Epoch CassetteVision, which I've got. Yeah. I've never used one of those. No idea what it is. Tell me more.
So Epoch is a really fascinating company. I did a blog post recently about the weird childhood thing about that we assume in the West that the big console battle was between Nintendo and Sega, and it always has been. They're the big rivals. And that's only ever true in the West. That's never true in Japan. At no point in Japan have Nintendo ever considered Sega their big rival. And that's because right at the beginning of the Japanese kind of console world, they were mostly importing machines from other countries. So the Vectrex and the Atari 2600 and machines like that, they all did really well over in Japan. They were imported and sometimes rebadged. And then Epoch came around and they decided, well, hold on, why don't we just make our own console? And they made the CassetteVision. And the CassetteVision it's a very early console. It's around the same abilities, a little bit more powerful than the Atari 2600. It's weirdly priced because the machine itself is really just like a dumb machine. And the cartridges have all the processor and stuff in them. So you get like a cheaper machine, but the games are more expensive. But that was the first truly successful Japanese homegrown console. And so when Nintendo entered the market, they assumed that was going to be their rival because they're the guys who are on top of the heap. They were the Nintendo of their time, basically. As it turns out, the next machine, the Super CassetteVision, whilst it is a very good machine, was far too late. And by the time it came out, the Famicom had already sold up the market and sold up all of the third-party developers. Epoch is genuinely a fascinating company. They're still around now, and they sell things like Sylvanian Families, which is obviously kind of a very different. But they own like the rights to a couple of big like cartoon characters. I can never remember the name, the weird blue dog thing. And so they still kind of there. But no, it's a company that if you're interested even slightly in the history of consoles, absolutely you should investigate them, because they've just got this giant part of the Japanese console culture that they owned, and they're just forgotten now. And it's weird. But it's the same as like there's British manufacturers, like the people that made a lot of the early Pong machines and stuff, and the first of Mattel's computers and stuff, and they're completely forgotten. But they had a huge impact on the market as well.
And you've also got machines that, because I assume the cassette vision was never available in the UK, but you've got machines that are Japanese but were available in the UK. I think it's Japanese. The Einstein, that's Japanese, isn't it?
No, that's Taiwanese.
Ah, okay. Important distinction.
It's weird. Okay, so Taitung is Taiwanese. The computer was apparently designed in the UK, and it did come out in the UK as well. That is the Taitung Einstein is another fascinating machine. It's very powerful for its era. It's very expandable technically. It has kind of possibly the biggest impact on the games market that no one knows about, because it was used by a lot of companies to develop for Z80 based machines. So the Spectrum and the Amstrad. But obviously it wasn't a big games machine because it was too expensive.
Matthew Smith was using an Einstein, I think, to develop. And I know that, I don't know how much memory the Einstein had, but I do know that one of the things about people actually use Amstrad PCWs later on when the Einstein wasn't available instead, because they had a large Z80 processor and a large amount of memory in order to develop in.
Yeah, so the Einstein, I think, mostly was 64K. I think they did have other models eventually which had memory swappers in, so they could be bigger than that. The Amstrad ones were more attainable and just easier to get, obviously, because British company, so they were just more available in the UK, where a lot of the like primary development, again, it's another video I made, which is another fascinating topic, is if you look at the current way that the games market works with the publishers, you can trace all that back to the UK and to how the UK games market built up. So we're kind of responsible for the really nasty games market we have now.
And any of those I've listed a few hardware projects from your channel in front of me. Any of those you'd particularly like to talk me through?
Yeah, I think the ones I did for the EXL 100 are some of my favourites. So for anyone that hasn't seen my videos on it, and I've done a lot of videos on it because I love the machine so much, the EXL 100 is a French computer made by ChinnyVision, and it's a lovely machine because it's got really nice styling, and it's based on a platform which isn't really common. So 6502 and Z80, I think everyone will agree, were kind of the main 8-bit platforms. And this one's based around entirely Texas Instrument chips. And that's because the original manufacturers of the machine were ex-TI people. And so they just used their contacts to get all these parts. But the one thing about that machine that is especially great is that everything is infrared. So the keyboard is infrared. The two joysticks, which are some of the most gorgeously designed joysticks, but also worst to use joysticks of the whole era. They've got like a little drawer at the front of the machine they sit in as well. They're also infrared. And the problem with those are that they almost certainly are not with the machine you buy. They so very rarely turn up with the machine that I just thought to myself, right, okay, I'm not going to be able to get one of these joysticks. I've been searching forever on French boards and everything, and I can't find them. So I just decided to make an Atari joystick to infrared adapter. And I copied the original like infrared schematics. I found the infrared schematics, I copied that, and I just mapped it to an Atari joystick. And it's a very simple thing, but I think it's quite impactful because it's a genuine, useful thing for this quite rare machine with the even rarer joysticks that you can just use a normal joystick. Plus, like I say, the joysticks weren't that great. So it's kind of good just to use any Atari-compatible joystick you have lying around.
Be able to make stuff and create stuff to support the whole ecosystem, is an important part of the community.
It is. It's kind of nice to give stuff back as well. You're giving back to the rest of the retro community, and it keeping this stuff alive. I've got this whole initiative called Keep It Alive. Very bad pun, but it's trying to keep this stuff alive and and running for all the people that want to continue doing like retro computing, retro gaming stuff. And there are people which do this kind of thing, and they charge through the nose for the stuff, and they never release their stuff for free. They never release the plans for it. I'm fine with people charging. Obviously, there's a lot of money goes into actually doing this stuff. It's not free for us who are building these things. There's all components and stuff, and just iterative design for getting things right. It costs a lot of money, but so that's fine wanting to get some of that money back, but never releasing this stuff for free is a problem, because once you stop doing it, it just goes away, and someone else you have to wait until someone else comes up with the same thing. It's the main way certainly I can give back. I guess the YouTube videos are good, but this way you're giving back to the whole community. For anyone that is interested in these machines and they need to fix the same problems you do, then you've got something that you're giving back to them.
And where can people find you online?
Yeah, so YouTube is youtube.com/@Re-Enthused. Yeah, I'm personally just look for Johnny Blanchard on Blue Sky or Mastodon on retrochat.online, and you'll find me there as well.
Well, Johnny, thank you for joining me today, and everyone check out Retro Re-Enthused on YouTube.